do not have a background in finance. I think that is a hindrance to a lot of people. They think they can't do it, freak out about, maybe I need to pay someone to manage my money for me. There's a lot of fees that are associated with that. What expenses do you have going out? You all have to live. We're going to have either rent or mortgage. You're probably going to have a gas payment to keep the house warm. You're probably going to have a water bill if you live in the city, or gas getting back and forth to work. What is that? Write it all out, create a spreadsheet or however you want to do it. I think understanding where your money's going is the first step in my opinion. And maybe we're going to live forever, so planning for later in life doesn't seem that important, but really it is that time that's the number one driver. It's not necessarily the amount of money. It was an eye-opener to see how quickly that $100,000 could compound if you and I just went in and did the basic companies, Coca-Cola. I didn't know anything about investing, but I knew the stuff that my family bought every day, and I knew the stuff that I used. Right, I do want to retire before I'm 65. That is a goal of mine. I'm going to let my portfolio do some work for me.
Investors, welcome back to another go-round worth of Masters of the Market. Joining me this week, I have Shane Green from Vested Interest, a dividend investor. Welcome to Masters of the Market. And I just want to get started here, pass you over the first question. What exactly is your story and how'd you get to where you are today?
I'll give you a quick breakdown. I mean, I come from a construction background. My dad's a mason, bricklayer. And when I say mason, I don't mean the shadowy government type of mason like you might be thinking, or some people might be thinking out there. He was a bricklayer, block and stone primarily, and brick. So I started working real young, about 12 years old, long before I probably should have, or way before I probably should have. So that's my background. I did go to college. I was in the military for a while. I was in the Air Force, so 4 years in the Air Force. I started college right out of high school, and I was working in the union as a laborer for my dad as a bricklayer. And it just got to be too much. So I joined the military, obviously. I went to school while I was in the military. I did get my bachelor's degree after about 10 years in occupational safety and health, which actually kind of does tie into dividend investing or investing in general, because you're studying a lot of trends. Graduated, got out of the military in 2005, went into construction management, which is what I do now. I do work for a large company, Blue Cross and Blue Shield. I'll just go ahead and say it, insurance company, but I do the construction work for them. So we're redoing floors, any new buildings we would build, that sort of thing. As far as investing, I do not have a background in investing. My parents are relatively poor. Neither one of them graduated high school. So we grew up relatively poor. So to be honest, I started saving whenever I was very young. Any money I got, summers off, I'd work. Holidays off, when most people were going on Christmas break or spring break, we would work. We'd do side jobs with my dad, doing basements, brick fronts on houses. And I would plug money away in my savings account. So growing up, I bought my own car for cash, and I pretty much bought everything for cash. Bought a Harley Davidson whenever I was 18, probably should have invested that money for cash. But I got into investing whenever I first joined the military, and they sit you down and they kind of go over, hey, you've got a relatively safe income coming in. Where do you want to put it? And they actually try to get you to sign up for a lot of donations. Where do you want to send money to? Red Cross, all these different agencies. I'm going to put the money in an account. So I started a Fidelity account. Would have been back in 2001. And I'm going to age myself a little bit here. I was born in 79, so I'm in my mid 40s now. So that would have been in my early 20s. 2001, graduated in 1998 from high school there. And I just started putting money in my Fidelity account. And I did about 3 or 4 years of that. And then I kind of stopped. I bought a house in 2003. My younger brother, I have two brothers. My younger brother had some issues where he got kicked out of school, so he had to move in with me. So I took that money that I was investing, or most of it, probably about 80% of it, and put it down in a house. Bought a house out in Utah where I was stationed at the time. That was my first home. I did pretty well on that. I ended up selling it about 5 years later after I got out of the military. Rented it for about a year and a half, 2 years. Had some issues with the renter and decided to sell it. Met my wife whenever I was living out in California. 2008 happened. Everyone knows the downturn in the markets in 2008. Obviously, I was living in Texas at the time, working for a big construction company there, and got laid off. So I went out to California when I had some family out there. To be honest with you, that's where I kind of made some investing mistakes, I would say. In 2008, after the market dropped, I had a significant amount. I had been plugging away in my 401k for a company I was working for about 5 years, 4 or 5 years there. 3 or 4 years. I got out of the military in 2005, 2008. 2009 is whenever I really got laid off. 2008 was the big downturn that I was mentioning there. 2009, I got laid off. And I actually pulled out some money then out of my 401k to move out to California, help me move, get established out there, rented a place with my brother and a friend of mine. So I would say that was my first investing mistake, pulling money out of my 401k. What I probably should have done is rolled that into a Roth IRA, my own individual account there, and pulled it out of that company's account. I wouldn't call it a mistake, but the other time I did that, when my wife and I got together back in 2011, we lived together for about a year, and then we decided, she was living in Atlanta. I was living between California and Texas, working for a company, flying back and forth. We dated for about a year, and we decided, well, if we're going to, date, we should probably at least be in the same state. We both grew up in Michigan. Actually, we went to the same high school together, so we've known each other since high school, but we haven't dated since high school. And then we both moved back to Michigan, rented for about a year, and then the market really, not the whole market, but I'll say housing market was really in free fall about that time. So we took advantage of that, actually, and I pulled out some of the money that I had left in my 401k, another, I think, 15 or 20,000, and we put down on a house. That actually worked out really well. We bought the house for, next to nothing, I'll just throw some numbers. We bought the house for $275,000. We lived there for about 5 years. We sold it for $617,000. We took that money and rolled it into the place that we live in now, which is a nice place. We live on the lake. Like I said, we have some jet skis in the back that we like to tool around on. But we also focus on paying down debt. We don't really have any debt but our mortgage. So that brings me to where I am today. Like I said, we both work. We're both pretty high net individuals, both make six figures. My wife worked for General Motors for the last 15 years. She actually just took a buyout, so she's in the job hunt right now. But that kind of brings you up to date. That's my story. Again, I do not have a background in finance. I think that is a hindrance to a lot of people. They think they can't do it. They freak out about, maybe I need to pay someone to manage my money for me. There's a lot of fees that are associated with that. And with the tools that we have now that we didn't have whenever I was younger, I mean, there was no Robinhood, there was no Moomoo, there was no Webull. Like I said, Franklin Templeton was one of the first accounts I had, and you were still paying for every trade, right? So, it's, $1 or 50 cents, whatever the fee was for every time you jumped in $100. May not seem like a lot, but over the course of a year, I mean, it'd be, $30, $40 in fees that you were paying that could have went into the market, where now, you can buy fractional shares. Most accounts do not charge you a thing to invest in. So I feel like now, compared to it was, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, is vastly different for the average investor.
The landscape is definitely changing, that's for sure. And I will say, I just had a conversation yesterday, with a good friend of mine. He pays an advisor, but the one question I asked him was, well, how much are you paying in fees? I said, and also every transaction, is there a fee? And he goes, I don't know. So you might want to look into that, because you never know what these guys are taking. But I want to ask you, when you first started off investing, you said, you're in the military. They often had guys, sending money or donating money rather, but you took a different approach. Where exactly did you get the notion to take that approach, or where did that idea come from you, just given you didn't have that background or wherewithal really when it comes to investing?
Yeah, well, I'll be completely honest. I had a teacher in high school, our senior year, in our government class. I wish I could remember his name. Again, I'm aging myself. Some of those details slip as you get older. But he set us up with it. It was almost like a mock account. All right, here I'm going to figuratively give you $100,000, and I want you to invest it in the market, all on paper. And then what we did by quarters of the year, how were you doing? What did you invest in? What's your return this quarter? And it was almost like a competition to see who could pick the best companies, who would get the best return. And to be honest, that's where I got the idea. It was just that little bit of exposure there in high school with the one teacher, because it's really not something outside of that class, that government class. And it really, to be honest with you, didn't tie into government all that much, other than there are some implications around political issues as far as how the market does from political party to political party. I don't want to get into politics, but he tied it in that way to a government class with, hey, this is what it can look like for you over time if you are consistently investing. And obviously, I don't think there's a lot of us out there, at least not for me, and I don't know about you, but that were given $100,000 to invest. But it was an eye opener to see how quickly, even over the course of one school year, that $100,000 could compound. If you just, and I just went in and did the basic companies, Coca-Cola. I didn't know anything about investing, but I knew the stuff that my family bought every day, and I knew the stuff that I used. So I went into the markets and did that. And my background, I kept into my circle of competence. I hear you say that a lot on your channel. I think that's really important. Stick within your circle of competence. Like I said, what are the products that you buy? What is your family business, so to speak? Mine's construction. So I went in and bought several, construction companies. I think Toll Brothers was one of them. Coca-Cola was one of them because everyone drinks Coca-Cola. It was my dad's favorite soft drink. I think it still is. And bought companies that I really knew. And over the course of, like I said, the one school year, it was eye-opening to see, wow, that $100,000 turns into $10,000. And I didn't really have to do anything for that other than the quote unquote reinvested dividends, which I didn't know that was what was happening. But obviously that was what was happening. Some reinvested dividends and obviously a little bit of growth.
I feel like what's really awe-inspiring just about that story is it just took one teacher, not even in a personal finance class,
Yep.
just sharing, hey, I'm going to give you this hypothetical $100,000. How are you going to invest it? Fast forward, I mean, in your reel, you're in the military, and that's how you get that idea to then invest in the market. When you first started investing, this prompts the question, you were investing back in high school, hypothetically, in those, Coca-Cola's, Toll Brothers. What'd you end up investing into when you first started?
First started with my Franklin Templeton account was actually just a S&P 500. I'd read some books at that point, had looked up some other major investors, Warren Buffett, obviously everyone knows who Warren Buffett is, Ben Graham and some other ones. And the one theme that, kept coming back was you kind of keep it simple, just invest into, you don't know enough about the market yet. Invest into a index fund or ETF. And I'd be honest with you, I don't know that there was a lot of ETFs at the time. So it was an ETF or an index fund, that tracked the S&P 500. And I'd have to go back and look at exactly what it was, but it was one of Franklin Templeton's ETFs that tracks the S&P or index funds, that tracks the S&P 500. So that's what I invested in, plug money away. I set it up on auto with the military. They have some pretty good deals where you can, and most banks have them now too. You can automate your payments. Hey, I've got my mortgage payment comes out, my car payment comes out, and all my payments would come out before I would touch any of my money. And I'll be honest with you, that's another thing that I think is really important. And I think a lot of people skip over is budgeting. Where is your money going? Until you understand where your money is going, you have no idea how much money you have to invest or how much money you're really blowing on stuff that you maybe shouldn't be blowing that money on. It really was a S&P 500 index fund that I really started with.
So we'll take a step back. Is that where you would recommend for newer investors or people looking to approach the market to start budgeting before you even press the buy trigger button and load up on stocks?
Yes, really understand, like I said, what's coming in, what's going out, and what's the delta. We've all got an idea of where our money is going, but I know whenever I first started getting, like I said, significant pay, and I'll be honest, when I first got out of high school, I joined the union and I was making pretty good money. Back in 1998, I think it was $19.80 an hour. So it was pretty good money. And I blew through a lot of money outside of the truck I bought for cash and the Harley I bought for cash. It was, I partied a lot on the weekends. I'll just be completely honest and hung out with friends and went out to dinners. A lot of the stuff I couldn't do whenever I was younger because my parents were relatively poor, I took advantage of as soon as I made some money and kind of blew a bunch of money where I wish hindsight being 2020 could go back and, that $10,000 I put down for a Harley and, $15,000 I bought a new truck or a relatively used truck, 3 or 4 years old. I could have bought a, $5,000 car and put the rest in the market, but I didn't. And that's the things we all have to learn, but I also wasn't budgeting anything. So I'd get my check on Friday. I'd pay my car payment. I'd pay my insurance, and then I'd probably spend, 70% of the rest of my money and keep whatever I needed to get through to my next paycheck in my pocket. And then cash was king. I knew if I spent, $20 on gas, and $20 on gas probably seems cheap, but gas back then was like 98 cents a gallon. So $20 got you a lot further than it does today. Then I would just use it that way. I didn't have a credit card. I didn't have a bank ATM card. I would just keep cash in my pocket and knew that $100 would get me to my next paycheck and then watch what I was spending that way. But it was spending every dime that I made and no budget, right? So it wasn't the right way to do it, in my opinion. And I have no idea, because I didn't do a budget, how much money I really did blow, right? So yes, I would say that's where you should start. What's coming in from your job? What expenses do you have going out? We all have to live. We're going to have either rent or mortgage. You're probably going to have a gas payment to keep the house warm. You're probably going to have a water bill if you live in the city, or if you live out in the country, you might have a well. So no bill there. But then your other bills, your food, your gas getting back and forth to work. What is that? Write it all out. Create a spreadsheet or however you want to do it. I think there's even apps now. Same thing. Things have gotten so much easier over the years to be able to do that. Where I used to do it on a pad and a paper, you can get in and do it on Excel or download an app and do it for yourself. So understanding where your money's going is the first step in my opinion. Yes.
Look, I still think today, I mean, for the vast majority of us, we should be using the pad and paper. I think it's too easy these days, and we often, because it's too easy, we pass it up. I personally still use a pad and paper to go through expenses, and because it's something, when you write it down, you're there, you're in it, you're locked in. But there's also something to be said now today with these impulsive purchases, the excitement that builds up around whatever it is that you want. And of course, that's not a new trend. I feel like it's almost gotten worse over the years. But I want to go back to those earlier days, for you. How would you, if you could, go back in time and kind of speak to yourself, help yourself realize that a lot of those purchases weren't really that necessary? Perhaps you should tuck away more money and save it and invest it versus spend on the purchases.
Well, I think I'll be honest with you. A lot of that I would sit down with myself. I'm a very visual person. To your point, same thing. I still write a lot of stuff down, and then I'll transfer it over to a spreadsheet or an Excel sheet or something like that, or a Word document, whatever I'm looking at. Write my goals down by hand, and then, like I said, transfer it over later, so I can save it and have it to look at for a later date. But if I was going to go back in time, that's exactly what I'd do. I would sit down with one of the calculators. I think Market Beats has a pretty good dividend calculator out there right now you could look up, and then plug in the numbers. Hey, first I would sit down with the budget. Here's what you're making. Here's your bills that are going out. Here's the money you have left over, whatever it was, $100, $200 a week, probably at that time. Because my bills were still relatively cheap. I didn't have kids to feed and 3 dogs to feed, that sort of thing. And then just show, hey, here's the money you have left that you could invest, and here's what it would look like over 5, 10, 15, 20 years. When you're younger, right, we all think we're just indestructible and maybe we're going to live forever. So planning for later in life doesn't seem that important. But really, it is that time that's the number one driver. It's not necessarily the amount of money that you're investing. It's the amount of time that you're investing that money in. So that's what I'd do. I'd probably sit down with myself and put the numbers down on paper and say, this is what it looks like. And that probably would have been an eye-opener for me to realize, hey, this is what maybe not what you're blowing on a week would have been an eye-opener, but the money that you're blowing in a month, certainly a quarter, certainly a year would be an eye-opener to most people who just do exactly what I was doing. You're living paycheck to paycheck. And some people don't even do that. I guess at least I was paying my bills first and then spending the excess. I mean, some people just go out and they start spending money before they pay their bills, and then they're left, how do I pay the bills at the end of the month? So I think that's even a worse situation. But that's what I'd do. I'd sit down, I'd write it out, look at the numbers, and see what they say.
Now, what's interesting to me is you started off with the S&P. And somewhere along the lines, you then got into dividend stocks, as your channel is all about dividend investing. Walk us through that transition. Why not just stick to the S&P, and why dividend stocks?
I would say for me, because I am older, I'm looking for more of the income side of the equation. So for me, it's some of that is higher yield, right? I do want to retire before I'm 65. That is a goal of mine. We are higher earners, and I have more funds. I'll just be honest. I have more funds to put into the market. So some of those higher yielding companies, maybe slower growth, to me look more attractive because I'm looking for more of, hey, over the next 5 to 10 years, I might not retire, but I may take a step back and do less work than I want, maybe doing more for myself. And I want to treat it similar to what Buffett's done as an investment machine, right? I'll probably transition everything into a trust that names my kids as whenever I pass, they inherit it. And then look what I can take out of those funds whenever I'm ready to invest in other avenues, whether that's land. I do want to buy some land over the next 3 to 5 years. So I'm going to let my portfolio do some work for me. But I still have in my portfolio VTI, which is the total United States stock market, and an ETF, SCHD. So I'm not completely outside of the market. Let's say it's not the S&P 500, because I think that right now the small caps are completely undervalued, which you'd miss if you just went to the S&P 500, which is part of the reason I chose VTI. So I wouldn't say I've transitioned completely away from it, but yes, most of my channel is focused on dividend growth because of where I'm at in my overall adult life, right? So more focused towards dividend growth and dividend stocks than I am just a strictly S&P 500.
Now, before we dive into your portfolio, go a little bit deeper into the portfolio itself, I want to ask you, how, when you came around to dividend investing in dividend stocks, how did you know which ones to nitpick and add to the portfolio? Was it still the same old approach of okay, I'm looking around, I'm seeing a bunch of people drinking Coca-Cola. That's going to be a dividend stock I'm going to add. Maybe it's you're working construction, Caterpillar. How'd you actually build this portfolio? And then looking back, we'll build upon that question. How would you recommend all of us begin to build a dividend portfolio?
So yes, I'd say similar approach. I actually did a video early on and went over kind of how I picked some of the companies that I did, and I just walked around my house. I opened my drawer. Aquafresh is a toothpaste that I used. So who makes Aquafresh? Gillette is the razor that I use whenever I do. I don't shave a lot, but whenever I do shave, Gillette is the razor that I use. Definitely one that my wife uses to shave her legs. We have a lot of Gillette. Procter and Gamble makes that, so maybe Procter and Gamble makes sense. Johnson and Johnson was just a name that I knew. CVS was where we get all of our prescription meds, and where we go to just, if I've got to run in quick and grab something, I'll go into CVS. So I invested in CVS and still hold it, even though it's really turned south on me. So I did the same type of thing. Opened my fridge. I got a lot of Kraft Heinz in there, whether that's the ketchup bottles or some other A1 sauce and other things like that. So I really did the same thing. What is my circle of competence? What do I use every day? What do the people that I know use every day? And then some other ones that were within my circle of competence outside of or inside the construction industry. Owens Corning is one of my best performing stocks, and I don't hear it talked about a lot in the dividend community, but I bought it I think 3 years ago and have done quite well in the company. But it's a name that I understood and knew. They sell shingles and insulation primarily, so the building industry, so long as we need houses to live in, I don't think they're going anywhere. And at the time, they were, in my opinion, a pretty good value. So same type of approach. What do you use? What do you understand? What do you know? Google is another one in my portfolio that I've recently added. If you talk to someone, they'll tell you, arguing or discussing something, well, go Google it. So it's really those companies that we all know and use, and again, I don't think are going anywhere over time. Obviously, none of us know that for sure. I mean, Kraft Heinz could go bankrupt tomorrow, and someone else buy them out. But that's really the same approach I took whenever I built out my overall portfolio.
Now let's talk about the construction of the portfolio. How many positions do you currently have in there, and do you think there's a number that it just begins to be too much? Like, if someone's walking around, let's just say their house, like you were, okay, this company, that company, it's like almost like the Oprah of dividend stocks, right? Everyone's buying dividend stocks, this one, that one.
Yeah.
How many is too many?
Well, I currently have, I think it's 31 positions. Two of them, like I said, is VTI and SCHD. So individual stocks, 29 companies, and that's about max for me that I can keep up with. And I look at them, around their earnings reports, so at least once a quarter. And then I do a stock pick of the day video series where sometimes I just look at a company that's pulled back on the day, and sometimes I'll pull in companies from my portfolio so I can do a quick reassessment on at least my initial screener to see where the company's at. And then if it looks like it's having trouble, I'll do more of a deep dive into the financials. So for me, I would say, that 20 to 30 stocks is probably max. And really, I don't know it's hard for me to say for, other people. I don't know if you had a lot of time and this was your only focus, I could easily see, 40 stocks. I look at 13Fs once a year or a couple times a year as well. I look at Buffett's. He's obviously accumulated them over time, but I think he's around the 40 to 50 different companies right there. So I could see that, but obviously he's got a lot more time and has a team to do it. So I think it really depends on the person. I think for someone starting out though, again, I would probably not go much more than a handful, five different companies that you can really dig into deep. If you want to go individual companies, I would really say for someone like myself who was starting out and didn't know anything, I would just avoid individual companies altogether until you get a bit of a competence under your belt and understand how to look at a balance sheet, how to read an income statement. What does revenue mean? I have some some comments on my channel from time to time. It's like, hey, can you do another video about what does price earnings mean? What is what are the terms that you're talking about on the channel even mean? Which it's hard to do those type of videos because you lose a lot of the people that have been there for a long time. But I also understand people getting into it, they don't know what those things mean. So for the newer investor, I would really stick to a handful or less, right? 1 or 2 ETFs, And then as you learn over a year or two, 3, 4 even, maybe add some of those companies that you really like and are really understand. But for an individual, it's really what kind of time do you have allocated? I mean, if I was a single guy, obviously I'd have a lot more time to look at different companies and maybe I'd be in a little bit more. But for me, 30 is kind of my top, and I kind of have a rule right now. If I add anything to the portfolio, I'm probably pulling something else out of the portfolio.
Now, a lot of people make the mistake. I mean, definitely with dividend investing, and I'll out myself. I did it back in 2020, where there were a lot of opportunities out there. I grabbed hold of a lot of them, but then there were certain positions. Maybe I had like a handful of shares, which equated to like, I don't know, a 25-cent dividend would come in, right? And it's like, is it worth that, or is it more worth doubling down or tripling down on maybe 7 to 10 holdings, or the core, in your case, 20 to 30? Versus just having a position in there that's only a handful or maybe 10 shares worth of the company? What's the strategy? What's the approach we should all take?
So same thing. I mean, I really think it depends on the person, but I'll list my strategy. Whenever I do, right now, I just added Occidental. I didn't think it was a very good value in the 60s. Whenever Buffett picked it up, I didn't see what the appeal was, but it would drop down into the 40s. It looked a lot more attractive. And I'm focused on building that position out with a couple other ones. I think my focus for January was 4 companies. So what I do is I kind of look at what looks like it's presenting value right now, and I focus on trying to build that out. And as I add a new position, I try to get it kind of built out to at least 100 shares where I can potentially run some covered calls on it if I want to do that. And I know we're probably talking into more advanced investing strategies than some of the newer should. I don't recommend options for newer investors at all. I wouldn't recommend that for the novice. But I try to build out my positions to where I've got at least 100 shares in a position to where I can do that. So I would say if you've got some smaller positions, it probably doesn't make much sense. You're not getting that snowball effect, so to speak, unless you are consistently adding to that position, or it's a relatively large position. You're not really seeing some of that compounding interest that you will see if you focus on those, like I said, 3, 4, 5 positions at first, and then once you really get those built out, then kind of branch off. I mean, you start getting, $100 from a company, $200 from a company in dividends a month or a quarter, whatever they pay. Realty Income's another one I have in my portfolio, so a monthly payer. Depending on how they pay out, you start seeing that compounding effect. Buy you 1 share or 2 shares or 3 shares, then maybe you can start branching out into other positions, because that compounding is really starting to take effect and build out that position without you adding to it. Whereas to your point, I've got 10 shares of something and I might be getting 75 cents, $1.25. You're not going to see that compounding effect. You should probably just focus on that position before you add anything else to the portfolio and let it start building on itself, and then maybe look at something else. So that's kind of the approach that I take. Once I get a position pretty well built out, I'll back off of it and let it do its own compounding. Now, that's not to say if there's a big pullback or it drops below my cost basis, then I'll go back in and start adding to it again. And to be honest, while we're on it, I think a lot of people, they start to see a position that they're trying to build out run up, and then they back off from it. And I think that's the wrong approach too. And I mentioned that in my video today. I did the video yesterday where I'm focused on several positions right now. Occidental is one of them. It's above my cost basis. But Owens Corning right now, a month and a half ago, I wasn't adding anything to it. I was up 90%, but it's pulled back by 40%. So I'm adding to it again. So I think that's a mistake. Some people too, they'll say, "Oh, it's above my cost basis. I don't want to add to it." Well, that's not necessarily a reason to stop adding to a position, especially if it's a smaller position that you are trying to build out. What is the dollar amount that you valued that company at versus it's up by 20%, so I don't want to add, is where I'd go with that. So I know that's probably not on the topic you were talking about, but that's just something I'll throw in.
No, it's a great point, because look, you could take a look across, YouTube. There's a lot of new creators, a lot of new younger creators coming on, and I actually see it quite a bit where you're seeing people grab hold of stocks and have 2, 3, 5 shares, and they're building out these other positions, and then it's almost the Nvidia effect, I'll just call it, for our time and day, where Nvidia ran up, and everyone says, "Oh, that must be the end of it," and then it continued to run up. And that's all that happens sometimes, is a missed opportunity when you think it's at the top. So you got to be careful, especially with a high quality company. Shane, I'd love to know right now as we speak, what's the total value of your portfolio and how much dividend income are you actually bringing in on a month to month?
Oh, I just did this.
You could
I
ballpark
don't
it.
know.
I'll make it easy.
Yeah. It's I'll give you the exact. My current portfolio is worth $309,393.32, and it is pumping out $12,489.36 a year in dividends with a yield on cost of 4.137%.
And if we wanted to develop a portfolio with similar returns, what would be like the top 5 to 10 positions that you have that you're most bullish on?
Right now, let me go back and pull that up just where I'm gonna pull it up real quick. Right now, for this month, I'll just go with the four that I'm focused on. LRCX, so Lamb Research, is one that I've been adding to pretty consistently. I think that whole sector right now is kind of pulled back. There's some value there. Occidental is another one in the energy sector that I'm adding to right now. Google was one that I was adding to. It's run up a little bit, but I still think there's some value there. Even anything under 190, I think, is a pretty good value right there. There are really some good ones. So those are three right there that I think are presenting some good value that I'm adding to. SCHD, obviously, I've been added. I add to SCHD and VTI every week. So those would be two that I would, or VOO if you're looking at the S&P 500, two that you could add to every week. Owens Corning is another one that I'm adding to, in Union Pacific. So LRCX, which is Lamb Research, Owens Corning I've been adding to, Union Pacific I've been adding to. Those would be three, along with SCHD, like I said, and VTI. Which, I'll be honest with you, I think the overall market's a little overvalued. I think the PE last I looked at was almost 30, or maybe in the 30s now, which to me screams overvaluation. But just because the market's overvalued doesn't mean there aren't companies within the market. I think a lot of people look at it that way. Oh, the market's overvalued, so all stocks are overvalued. That's definitely not the case. There are some sectors. Healthcare sector has really pulled back. Industrial sector seems like there's a lot of value in the industrial sector. A lot of companies there. You mentioned Caterpillar early on. I'm not necessarily saying Caterpillar, but that's a sector it's in that's really pulled back. So healthcare sector REITs right now seem to be really pulled back. If you're looking for something in the housing sector, REIT seems to be one of the sectors that owns, Realty Income right now seems to be of value, and several others there. So to me, it's actually more. I know you're asking for positions, but I kind of look at it more as, where is the market presenting value at the time, right? The market is cyclical. We go through cycles. So you might have a really good cycle for tech, for example, and it seems like I'm always doing what other people might say counterproductive. I'm going in the opposite direction. A market pulls back, and I'm investing, and everyone's going, "Oh, I don't want to be there because everything's pulled back." Well, that's when I want to be there. I want to be there when that market's pulling back, or when that stock's pulling back, not the opposite. And again, not to say you shouldn't invest in a company or a company's stock when it is going up. If you valued it and it's still showing value, I don't care if it's gone up 20, 30, 50%. If it hasn't hit your price target yet, you should still be adding, in my opinion, as it goes up, because to your point, you probably are missing out on that upside. But I really do focus on what sectors and what companies have pulled back. Where am I seeing the most value at the moment, versus this company's great and I'm just going to throw money into it regardless. If you are doing that, there's no price you won't pay, right? And I think that's a mistake too. If there is a value for these companies, and sometimes the stock price can disconnect from the value of the company. So I do like Buffett's approach, where you value the company first, and then find a value that you're willing to pay for the stock, and then that becomes your high watermark, and then revisit that quarter to quarter, year to year, whatever it is.
In your experience now over the years with dividend investing, what are some of the red flags that, as a dividend investor, you would recommend all of us watch out for?
Getting rich quick. Avoid anything that seems that it's going to make you wealthy very quickly. I would say we do have that. To your point, I think you were alluding to earlier. I'll call it the fast food mentality in a lot of society now. You want to pull in and get your food within 3 to 5 minutes. And I think a lot of people want to pull into investing and get their millions within 3 to 5 months. And it's just not realistic. high yielding stocks that, seem that their yield is elevated to a point you think, oh man, I'm getting 15 to 20%. A lot of these yield max funds that I see right now, with complete NAV erosion, where your initial investment might be going down by 10 to 15%, but you're getting a 10 to 15% dividend yield in return, or 20%, some of them. To me, is the wrong way to go. Might be a good way to go for someone who's retired, 60, 70, 80 years old, and they don't care about that NAV erosion. But for some of the younger folks I see in it right now, that NAV erosion is really going to hurt you later on, because it really diminishes your investing power, right? If I roll from a stock that's up 15% into a stock that's down 20 to 30%, there's a lot of value there. I've already gained 15% in market value, and if I'm right, and I value the company right, and it's significantly below value, I have the potential for a significant return. Whereas if I was investing something that has significant NAV value or NAV erosion, where my initial investment is decreasing, I can't do that. I can't take that, gain of 20, 30, 40, 50, 60%, roll it into something that's undervalued, and then run that gain up, because I've decreased my investing power, which I think is a mistake.
Now, Shane, you mentioned earlier on when we were discussing your portfolio that Google was a stock of interest. And I don't know about you, but at least when I mention any sort of lower yielding dividend stock, I always get the heat for, these companies not being dividend payers. What's the importance for going for a Google, in your opinion? And I mean, do we classify it really as a dividend stock? Same thing with Apple, Microsoft, a lot of these tech stocks that certainly have a lot of upside left in them. Should dividend investors be avoiding these growth opportunities?
No, just flatly no. And I think there is a huge misconception in the dividend growth community and investing community overall, to be honest with you, that there is a difference between growth and dividend investing. I think the study that I saw, and this came from Gen X dividend investors, so don't quote me on this. I haven't looked up the actual study. I did write it down on my notepad. I do have a notepad where I take a lot of notes next to me here. And he mentioned that I think it was just focused on the S&P 500. Something like 70% of the companies in the S&P 500 pay a dividend. So the vast majority of companies, I wouldn't say in the overall market, but at least in the S&P 500, do pay dividends. And most companies over time, once they've reached that point of, we don't have an avenue to reinvest our funds back into the company in an effective manner, will start paying dividends. Google, for example, I think last year was when they actually started paying dividends. So I think that's a mistake. You miss out on that. And especially the companies that start growing, just start paying their dividend and growing that dividend, those are typically the companies that are growing it the fastest. Yes, you might start out with a, I think Google right now is a 0.3% dividend yield, which is, next to nothing. But I'm expecting, it to match something like Microsoft, 10 to 15% growth every year. So it won't be long, 3, 4, 5 years, where that 0.3%, at least for your yield on cost, might be to the 1.5, and then 10, 15 years might be to that 2.5, 2.3. So I think there's a balance there. And I certainly have some higher yield, slowing growth. I'll just throw an example out there. I know a lot of people were running away from AT&T several years ago whenever they cut the dividend. I'll be honest, I bought it. I bought it kind of at the low point after it cut the dividend, because the same thing. I'm like, well, it's dropped off a bit. It's already cut its dividend. And I think I'm up like 20 or 25% on it already. So it's not necessarily when you buy something either. It's the value you buy it at, right? I think Warren Buffett puts it best. How does he say it? Oh, I can't remember it off the top of my head. But something along the lines of, it's not what you buy, it's when you buy, it's the price you buy. Value is what you buy, price is what you pay, value is what you get. I think he says it something like that.
That's it, yeah.
So you can certainly wait for some of these, like Google, for example. I was buying it in the 140s. I think my overall cost base is in the 160s, so I was buying it in all the way up into the 180s. So my cost basis on it is like 0.67, almost 0.7, so almost twice what it is now. But that's my point. It's not necessarily the company or what the yield is. It's when you buy that company. But no, I think that's a mistake, because you are missing out on a lot of that growth. that potentially could be there. And that's a misconception, in my opinion, that there's a difference between a dividend paying company, which most companies are, or at least end up being, and growth. I don't know any dividend investors out there who are saying, I don't want my portfolio to grow over time. Like I said, unless you're 60, 70, 80, 90 years old and you're just looking for income and you're not worried about that NAV erosion, most of us, 20s, 30s, certainly, even into your 40s and 50s, because I think most of our working lifetime is going to be into our 60s, 65, probably is the average right now. You want that growth over time, whether it's in the dividend or whether it's stock appreciation growth. Both of them account towards that growth of the overall portfolio. So yeah, I would say don't overlook those. I do consider them dividend-paying companies. They do pay a dividend, whether it's a small one, Microsoft, Apple, Google. The LRCX is a lower dividend growth as well. So a lot of those companies in the tech sector, Meta, I think, has recently started paying a dividend. I wish I'd have bought that 2.5 years ago whenever it was really in the toilet. But I was focused on other things at the time. So I try to put a nice mix in the portfolio. Like I said, I do have some higher paying, slower yield, which, again, being focused on the cash flow side of that, if you actually look at the dividend calculators, slower growers can actually accumulate faster. That's why Warren Buffett's return on Coca-Cola is so high, even though the growth per share isn't that great. Over time, the dividend growth has been such that it's really, his cash flow from it has really increased. So there is something to be said for those higher payers, but I say watch that. I really focus on the payout yield. I mean, if they get up to the 70s, I say 75% or less for their free cash flow yield payout. If they're above that, I start to worry, is the dividend cut coming? Obviously, that's different for companies like BDCs, business development companies, or REITs, where they're required or they often pay out 90% plus. I don't worry about it for companies like that, or they're issuing shares, which a lot of REITs do, to continue to increase that dividend. So it's kind of a mix, but I wouldn't avoid those lower payers with higher dividend yield and dividend growth over time, because you're really missing out on some of that dividend growth.
Now, there's obviously, a differentiation between younger investors and older investors, how the two should be investing. And more recently, I've really been pumping out a lot of videos on the investor profile, getting to know your investor profile, your timeline, your risk tolerance, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious, from your standpoint, is dividend investing something that younger investors should flock to? Should they stick more towards growth? And then likewise, on the flip side of this script, should older investors, should they be flocking to dividend stocks, or just, really to safety with ETFs? Where would you say that these investors should go? Because, again, very different investor profiles could lead to very different returns.
Yes, yeah, and that's really, I'll be honest with you, you're starting out with the right approach. What is your profile, right? What are you looking to do? What is your goal as an investor? Your age certainly comes into play. We on the phone, or whenever we first jumped on before we started recording, I mentioned I have 2 kids, so I'll just go over their custodial accounts, because they're 10 and 12. My daughters are 10 and 12, and we've got custodial accounts set up for both of them. And I do something very simpler to keep it hands off. I have, I think it's, what is Schwab's S&P 500 match? I can't remember. Is it SCHD maybe? But I have the Schwab dividend ETF that matches the S&P 500 in theirs. But I also have SCHD, and I also have an emerging markets ETF in there as well. So that's how I've set up their portfolio. Just three ETFs. We dump money in whenever they get birthday money, something like that. So it's a blend of growth, dividend payer, dividend growth, with some emerging. Again, some people want to stay out of foreign markets. I get that, but I think there is some value right now in emerging markets around the world, especially after the CV-19 stuff that happened. You've got a lot of markets out there that are still pulled back. So that's part of the reason I have it there, and I think that we might see more growth outside of the United States compared to where we are. We're a pretty built out country overall, and some of these growing countries really present some value. So that's how I have their setup. It's around both growth and dividends, and I don't think the right approach, even for someone in their 40s like myself, I'm 45, like I said, born in 79. So I think there's a good mix there to be had, where you can look at both growth. I'm certainly still looking at another 20 years of potential work, and hopefully another 60, 70 years of lifespan. So I want that portfolio to continue to grow over time and eventually hopefully turn it over to my kids whenever I pass as well. So I think there's a mix. There's a mix there certainly, and you can shift that mix depending on where you are at. Someone in their teens, if you hopefully start investing in your 18, 19, or even before, if your parents open up a custodial account, maybe you're looking more at 70% into growth, which is kind of how I have theirs set up. 20% into dividends, which is what I have their SCHD set up, and then 10% into emerging markets. That's how I have. That's kind of how I have theirs set up. And then as you age and grow, you can obviously shift that. I can shift more towards the income side. Maybe I want to go more towards 60-40, 50-50, whatever you want to do as time passes. But you certainly can adjust that over time. But I think your approach is the right one. What is your dividend profile? And what I am assuming you mean, and I've watched some of your videos, so I think I'm right on it, is what is your strategy and what are your goals? Where are you at in life, and what are you looking to attain with your overall portfolio?
Oh, 100%. I mean, look, so many people, it got me, dividend investing. It's just, passive income, you want it now, and you want to accumulate all this passive income. But when you really ask yourself that question, is like, okay, I get all this passive income, but like, do I need the money right now?
Right.
What am I going to do with this? So is the high yielding dividend stocks what I should be gunning for, or should it be more dividend growth? But also to the same end, if you've read the book, The Snowball, it's all about Warren Buffett. And what that book, something I took from it was Warren Buffett really, avoided a lot of the tech stocks. I mean, best friends with Bill Gates, but never invested in Microsoft, right? That would have been his cue in to get his head in the game with Microsoft, if any, right? And he didn't. So where I'm going with this is, and you got another 20 years or so yourself, why not add some tech stocks to your portfolio for that growth? Why keep it, simply safe, I'll say, with dividends?
Yeah, and part of that might be I just recently, like I mentioned, added Google and LRCX, which is more on the tech side. I do have HPQ in my portfolio also, which is on the tech side. Much slower growth there, obviously, being an older company. But I'll be honest with you, almost every business I've worked for, typically I was walking around with an HP computer in my bag. So that's part of the reason I went there. I think it's so long as companies are buying those computers, they're not going anywhere, and they are getting into the 3D model. But to your question, why not go more growth or more tech heavy? You've got to also remember some of it is driven by what our experiences are. Again, being older, I remember the dot-com crash, right? That was right as I was graduating high school. So when I got into the investing in 2001, it was really just starting to bottom out from the tech crash. And to me, I was so fearful of buying a company. I felt like during the dot-com bubble, everyone wanted to buy, and I wasn't investing at the time, but if you watched any investing channels, all they would talk about is .com, everything .com. You need to be investing in .com. I felt the same way whenever they were saying stuff about 3G to 4G, 4G to 5G. You've got to be investing in the telemarket community. It's going to change the world. So right now it's the same thing with AI. AI is going to change the world. And I'm not saying these things aren't going to be prevalent over the next 10, 15, 20 years, but it's I don't know if you've ever watched the movie Up. Again, I'm going to kind of go back to some of the things, my experiences. I've got kids. So the movie Up, and you've got the dog and it's squirrel, where you're constantly looking for the new shiny squirrel, shiny thing. So I think some of it is that where you're kind of driven by your past experiences. And I think Buffett may have been apprehensive around some of that. And obviously he's gone into some more tech stuff recently. But because of that .com crash, I think that might have impacted some of his decisions. Well, what company is going to be the winner of that, so to speak, where it's hard to say. And so he just avoided it because it wasn't in his circle of competence, which he's been admitted that it wasn't within his circle of competence. But I mean, if you certainly are an IT person and you understand that stuff, my wife is on the IT side. To be honest with you, that's part of the reason I never got into investing in the crypto stuff. She kind of shakes her head about that and says, we've been using that type of data transfer for decades. It's nothing new. So the idea that it's all of a sudden going to be a currency that changes the world is foreign to her, but I understand a lot of people are in it now. So it's really about that circle of competence. What do you understand? What do you not understand? But don't be afraid of growth. I mean, wouldn't certainly, but I would also say I think a lot of people think tech equals growth. That's not necessarily the case either. I'm going to go back to it's not necessarily what you buy, it's when you buy it. And I'll go back to Owens Corning. I mean, if you were to ask someone 3 years ago, whenever I was buying Owens Corning, and they were buying maybe a tech company, and they would ask me why are you buying that? Why aren't you buying growth? Well, that's my best growing stock. I mean, like I said, I'm up over 50%, and it was within the last few months or so up upwards of 90% until this recent pullback. But I bought it at the right time. So you can certainly have growth outside of the quote unquote growth sector if you're buying those valued companies. And that's what I really focus on. It's not necessarily, I hate the terms that get thrown around because I think that creates a perception. You can't, like, I got to be invested in growth to find growth, or the opposite. I've got to be buying dividend stocks because I need the return on stuff. It's really a mix. I mean, where can you find the best value for your dollar to grow to meet your investing strategy? And it certainly can be outside of quote unquote what people are calling growth, the tech stocks, if the value is presented elsewhere. And that's why I say I really focus on where is the market right now in the market cycle, and what sectors are presenting the value during that potential market downturn, because I believe that's where you're going to find the most growth, right? If you're pulled back on a stock, I don't care if it's Kraft Heinz. If it's cheap enough, I mean, I'll invest in it, even though I hate the fact that they haven't grown their dividend in several years. But it's also the flip side. If I don't see the type of growth I need to, don't be afraid to shift your focus and invest in something else that might be presenting better growth, or shifting your focus altogether. If you feel something has maxed out and it's way overvalued, you can certainly sell that into something that's undervalued so that you can ride that train up. That's another thing I'd say. A lot of people get married to stock, and I'm just as guilty. Kraft Heinz has been on my potential sell list for a couple years now before it really dropped off, and I probably should have sold it. But I do get married to stocks, and it's hard for me to sell because you don't want to be wrong. No one wants to admit that they were wrong. So I would say that's part of it. Don't be afraid of growth, but there's certainly growth opportunities outside of what is considered quote unquote growth or the tech sector.
I was going to say that ketchup is too good to let Kraft Heinz go. I think Buffett still holds it in his portfolio either way, and so it's sitting there too. Guy said that ketchup is just too good.
I think he's also mentioned it's like one of his worst mistakes also. So.
But to your point, look, people don't want to be wrong, and so you hold on, and then all of a sudden you're holding on for too long, and you're wrong. So better to cut your losses much sooner rather than later. Now, I have an interesting question for you, though, because you did, illuminate the fact that you're a six-figure earner. Your wife is a six-figure earner. You guys probably have this, very powerful, the both of you, portfolio that then comes together. There's a lot of investors out there, I'm sure you've gotten this as a fellow creator, saying, well, Shane, I don't have that much money coming in, or, I don't have the capacity to invest like you're investing. So dividend investing, or perhaps investing for me, will just never work. What do you say to that? How do you combat that?
Oh, I mean, I think that's a great point. I think that goes back to your understanding your profile, and I'll go back to the budget. What realistically do you have coming in that you can invest? And that should be one of the deciding factors into how you invest, right? If you're not able to invest a significant amount like I am, I would simply keep it simple and let time do its thing, especially if you're a younger investor, which that's probably the case for most younger investors. Like I said, unless your parents are well off and have left you a significant amount of money, you're probably taking whatever you have left, after bills, there's $50, $100, $60, $30, whatever it is, and throwing that in the market. And you might be buying fractional shares. So don't let that be a deterrent, because again, the number one driver is not necessarily how much you are investing. It is how long and consistent you are investing. That little $30 investment today, it could be thousands by the time you're in your 50s or 60s with just compounded interest over time. So again, I think it's really understanding what is your investing profile. Where are you at in your investing journey? What are your overall goals, which certainly should include how much do I have invest, and then make a rational decision of what you're able to accomplish, and realistically what you're able to accomplish. I think some people, I'll use NVIDIA since you brought it up. They're thinking, oh, NVIDIA is growing by 20%, 30% a year, whatever it's been growing lately. And that's going to continue for 15, 20 years. So I'll just throw my money into NVIDIA and I'm going to get 30% returns, and I'm going to be a multimillionaire in 5 years and a billionaire in 30. Not realistic. Typically, as companies get larger, they do tend to slow down in growth and slow down in dividend growth as well. So I'd keep that in mind on some of the quote unquote lower yielders, higher growth, that might slow down on over time as well. So it's reevaluating as well. You might have a plan that you put in place, spend 5-10 years investing, and then completely change your strategy. For me, again, being in my mid 40s, I'll say over the course of my lifetime, my goals, my objectives have probably changed every 8 to 10 years. You might be renting now and think that's great, but you meet somebody and want a house in 5 years. Well, that's going to definitely impact your investing strategy. I'll be honest with you, finding someone who is like-minded is a big part of it as well. It's going to be at some point, if you want a mate there, it's going to be about what are your goals, and I mean both of your goals jointly, right? Not just your goals individually. So that's important too. But I would say just set your plan up for whatever you can invest. And it's not about how much you're investing. It's about maintaining that consistency over time, weekly, monthly, quarterly. If you've got the money to invest, make sure you're consistent. But then also don't be afraid to, hey, this isn't working. This isn't doing what I thought I was going to do. I'm 5 years in. I'm not seeing the results I want. I'm going to shift more towards growth, or I'm going to shift more towards higher yielding, higher growing dividend payouts, lower yielding stocks, something like that, or maybe outside of dividend altogether. But I'll say, like I said, if you're buying even just the S&P 500, there's a dividend attached and there's dividend growth attached to that. So that's why I would say I would recommend to the initial investor, that's probably where I would go. I know that's where I think I might have lost you, Ari. Are you there? Did I lose you?
There you go. It cut out for a split second. You're back. I think we got it, though. If it's all recorded on your end.
Okay. Yeah. Again, I would say. Yeah. Well, if you got a snippet, that's no big either. Yeah, I would say, like I said, set up your profile, understand who you are as an investor, and then consistency. That's the key. It's not necessarily how much you're investing. It's the consistency and time that you're investing. Because if you wait, I'll be honest, if you do some of those calculators and look at it where you're just investing $30, $50, $100 a week and starting in your 20s, 30s, the earlier you start, the better, and you look at those calculators and then you wait, I'm not going to start investing till I'm 30, or I'm not going to start till I'm 40. You have to put in a lot more money the later you start to get the same returns as someone who's putting in that $20, $30, $40 in their teens, 20s, or 30s compared to someone who starts in their 40s and 50s. So it's time. It's time investing and consistency investing versus the large amounts you might see. And I would say the best thing you can do is stop comparing yourself to other people. You're an individual. Treat yourself as an individual. We're all going to be at different points in our lives. And it's where you end. It's not where you're at in the race right now, right? I was a track guy in high school, and it's not, you start back in blocks and you might be in the 6th lane there, and you're, 50, you feel like you're 50 yards behind everybody. It's the same race. We're all going to end up in the same box at the end of this race. So stop comparing yourself to everyone and run your race.
Well, it's almost a powerful ending, but I got to hit you with the hot seat question for the last question. But if I could, I would end it right there. Shane, if I were to give you, just like your high school teacher did, hypothetically some money. We'll throw you $10,000. Curious to know which individual stock, or you can even throw it into an ETF if you wish, but I have a feeling you won't. Which individual stock would you throw the 10K into, and why?
Right now, I'll be honest, I would probably throw it into, even though it's a larger position in my portfolio, I might throw it into. I probably would split it up, and I wouldn't throw it into one spot. But I would probably throw it into, and I'm not going to give you an individual stock, but I'll give you three sectors that I think are showing a lot of value. I would probably look at healthcare, industrials, like I mentioned earlier, and REITs. I just feel like there's a lot of value in those three sectors. And healthcare, I think, is because of the political changes right now. We're not sure what's going to happen with some of the people that are going to be appointed. REITs obviously are being impacted by higher interest rates. In the industrial sector, I think people are expecting a slowdown. So you're starting to see some of the Union Pacifics, the Kansas City there, Canadian company, railroad there. So probably in those three sectors, I would split it up between the three. Now, if I was just looking at one spot to dump 10 grand right now, again, I feel like the S&P 500 is overvalued, but I don't think you can ever go wrong with just dumping the money in the S&P 500 or something like VTI, or if you wanted to go super conservative, something like VT, which I don't know that I don't like VT personally because I feel like there's a lot of drag with some of the company or the countries out there that just don't see the growth that you see in some of the developing nations. So probably S&P 500 if I'm looking for an index fund or ETF. And then the three sectors I mentioned pulled back right now would be where I'd focus.
So investors, if you want to catch more of Shane's insights, his channel is The Vested Interest. It's going to be down there in my description as well as the pinned comment. Highly recommend you give Shane's channel a look. Definitely a lot of insights where I often go as well as a fellow investor and creator. But Shane, I want to thank you so much for joining me on Masters of the Market. And for all the investors out there, until the next go round of Masters, we will see you all there.